Hello and welcome to the Peak and Roll podcast. We have a fun episode for you today. It's been a while since we've recorded. I'm your host, DJ Peak. We have our co-host, Caleb Mushinski, here today. We have a wealth of stuff to talk about. We're going to be talking about different commitments. We're going to do a little bit of player breakdowns of Stephon Castle and Judah Mintz. And when it comes to these kind of breakdowns, there's I'm going to say little you can do, especially before you kind of see them on the college floor. Of course, there's going to be strengths and weaknesses we can dive into. But as I've told the BJ Boston story many times, some of these guys might go into the second round that we talk about before we actually see them. So we'll do what we can, and we're going to give you the info that we've been able to research. Caleb, how are you doing? It's been a couple weeks since we chatted.
I know it's been a crazy past few weeks, but I feel like stuff is just starting to settle down again finally. So it's nice to be able to just spend a weekend at home and not worry about going 2, 3, 4 hours somewhere away. So it's
Yep.
nice to finally enjoy summer a little bit, as busy as it's been all year.
I'm like you mentioned, you're enjoying summer. I'm enjoying it turning to fall
Hmm.
because I always like wearing sweatpants and a sweatshirt going out. Or it's honestly my favorite thing to do is to wear shorts and a sweatshirt. And fall is the only time you can really do that. Maybe spring, but fall
Yeah,
I'm the most comfortable.
I just wore a sweatshirt and shorts today for probably the first time in like a month and a half for like a full day kind of thing. So
Huh.
it's just one of those days where it's a cooler, rainy day, and I just
Yep.
seized the opportunity.
Yeah. And that's what we're going to move into is seizing the opportunity and talking about some of these commitments going on in the NCAA. So, Caleb, I'm going to give you the floor here. What are some of the big names for you? And I'm really excited for you to talk about UCLA.
UCLA is just going on this crazy recruiting spree. So one of the things we talked about in our past videos before was just I didn't really see how they were gonna do it next year in college, just given how much turnover they had their roster. Obviously, Jaime Jaquez is a huge piece, and Jalen Clark were both draft picks. Tiger Campbell, who seemed like he's been there for like 10 years, just finally graduated and left as well. So they didn't really have much to come back, but they just landed two huge recruitments from Burke Tunsell and also Ade Mara. Both those guys are projected to get drafted in 2024. Ade Mara is high as top 10 I've seen in some mock drafts. But that is huge news because I thought it was going to be one or the other. Turns out they just got both of them.
Mm.
So that's a huge addition to their front court, which that also kind of seemed a little thin. But just on top of that, too, they also have a couple other foreign guys coming in as well. One of them being Jan Vide, a guard from Slovenia, who gave USA a bit of a run for their money in the U19 tournament, but he averaged around 18 points a game. So that will give them a little bit more options with offense, as well as another French player. I might get this wrong, but Elaine Fiblio, I totally probably just butchered that, but he is regarded as a top 4-star recruit by many websites. I know 24/7 had him regarded as like a top 40 recruit in that class. But just a fun little fact about him too is he led for France's U18 team last year in 2022. He led the team in scoring that year with 12.6 points a game, and that featured some guys that we've thrown out, such as Alex Sarr and Zachary Risache. So that's obviously to another wing that gives him more offensive options. Plus, you throw in a guy we talked about before, Adem Bona, who I'm sure we might even dig deeper into. That was someone who could have went in the first round this year, arguably, but he chose to come back from their UCLA. So they've got
Mm.
quite a plethora of really intriguing international talent, and that's just, I mean, look at Gonzaga. They've been doing it for years now. You got guys like Killian Tilly and Domantas Sabonis who came from there. I mean, it's sometimes now with this new international like wave of players coming in, plus two, you now have NIL, which is a lot more appealing. Some of these guys, instead of wanting to play professional ball and making some money there overseas, they just come to college because they'll dominate and then they'll just make. But aside from UCLA, another big signing I thought too for Kentucky was someone who I know I'm definitely not going to get this right, but Zvonimir Ivisic from Croatia, who just had this huge breakout performance in
Mm-hmm.
Europe's U20 FIBA tournament. He was one of the top prospects considered in his age group, so that's another huge addition for them. Because I don't know, do you know the name Aaron Bradshaw by any chance? Have you seen that circulate in the recruiting class?
I have not.
So he is the undisputed like number one center recruit of 2023, and he recently broke his foot. But there's a lot
Mm,
of stuff going on there where it might be like a Shaden Sharp situation where it's the best interest, like with his agency, to not play the whole year of Kentucky and then just end up being a first round pick somehow. So who knows? I haven't really seen too much about that, but there was just some stuff speculating when this all went down and how he was supposed to have a broken foot, and yet he looks like he can just move around like no problem. So we'll see how that turns out.
yeah, and going back to UCLA for a minute, especially with all those international players, I'm curious how that's going to translate to their game on the floor and the game plan and how they're going to kind of manage. I know college basketball is very different than European basketball, which is very different than NBA basketball. So, Caleb, that's what I'm going to ask you: is there any are there going to be any major changes to kind of what UCLA does with these guys?
I don't think so. I mean, Mick Cronin is a guy who's seen lots of success throughout his career, so I don't really think it matters where he gets his guys from. If anything, they're going to bring some unique skill sets that a
Mm,
lot of teams don't have not seen really. So that might even play to his advantage over other teams. But what's nice about these overseas guys as well coming in is they all play very team friendly basketball. I mean, Sell and Mara are two of the best passing big men in this class. You combine it with someone like Jan Vide and Elaine Fiblio as well. They can go and get their buckets, get their shots up, especially too for a team that lost a lot of its scoring last year. They're going to need all the help they can get. So there's a lot of opportunity for everyone.
yeah. And we're going to move on to talking about Stephon Castle. And he's been a guy who I've kind of dug into, the first guy in this kind of 2024 NBA draft class that I've been able to kind of watch a lot of film on, take some notes on. And it's a pretty interesting prospect as a taller point guard at 6'6, 6'7 with a 6'9 wingspan. And the first thing that spoke to me was from watching the Old Man in the Three podcast with JJ Redick when they had Matas Buzelis on, who is a potential top 3 pick in this upcoming draft. Talk about how high respect he has for Stephon Castle for his playmaking ability. He said it was basically a story about how he's playing with him, I think, at the McDonald's All-American game or something like that. And Stephon Castle whipped a pass that he didn't even think he was going to be able to do. And right from there, he gained his respect. So this is just a guy who has who has like basketball in his DNA. His father played at Wake Forest. He's the number 9 player per 24/7 Sports with the 6th overall recruiting class for UConn with four other 4-star recruits. So UConn is going to be pretty stacked, and that's what we're going to get into a little bit later in terms of weaknesses. Is maybe the chances he'll have will be a little low.
Yeah, I mean, UConn's got a couple guys coming back who'll be big, mostly in their forward spot is where they have a lot of their returning presence with Donovan Clingan, who is a name we might even get into this year. He's a projected lottery pick for going into 2024. And also as well, Alex Caravan, who knows, he's a very good player as well. He could make his way
Yeah.
into draft boards. But one guy that people know that if they watched any of the March Madness was Tristan Newton, who had the triple-double in the championship game. He's back for one more year for a 5th year. So that's a huge veteran presence at guard. So you don't need Castle to take the reins right away. He can just ease into it and let Tristan Newton do most of the ball handling and initiating on offense. But given someone like Castle, you just see now like these 6'6", 6'7" guys, like combo guards, who like you mentioned with Matas Buzelis, says they can just initiate offense and just run the floor with the ball and just create for others. That's just seemingly becoming more of a trend as you're getting these taller. I mean, look at Anthony Black, perfect example.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't have nearly the offensive ability that Castle has, but still, it's just these taller 6'7" guards, forward combo guys that just are becoming a lot more intriguing to teams.
Yeah, that's a really good point because to me it almost feels like if you're under 6'4", you're almost not going to be able to get that many minutes in a playoff setting
Mm-hmm.
unless you're like a top 10 guy in the league, top 20 guy in the league. And that's what we're moving to. We're moving to a larger NBA. We see it with Victor Wembanyama, Chet Holmgren. Those are going to be probably 2 of the best players in the NBA because of their size and skill. But you also look at guys like Anthony Black, Cade Cunningham, Luka Doncic. We'll get into that a little bit later. But you're seeing those guys kind of dominate the offense and be the one with the ball making the decisions. So we're kind of getting less of those shorter guards. And that brings me to a point I was going to talk about a little bit later. And it's looking at the other point guards in this class, such as Elliot Cadeau. You also have Isaiah Collier, and you also have DJ Wagner, who are shorter guards. I mean, Wagner's only, what is he, 6'3"?
He's about
And then
like 6'2", 6'3", yeah.
And then you have the other two are 6'4" and 6'1" respectively. So Stephon Castle is the tallest guard in this class, and that could really be something that projects him this year.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know too, like with Isaiah Collier, to me, he's a better prospect in my eyes because Castle is more of a wing guy, but Collier is like hands down the best true point guard in this entire class. I mean, there's a reason why he's at the top of the boards across the country for recruiting, across all recruiting bases. He's literally everything. Like he's got good size to him, good physicality, really smart, high IQ player, can shoot too. So he's literally the complete package for a high prospect point guard.
Yeah. And just looking more at Cadeau, or not Cadeau, what am I talking about? Castle and some of his strengths so far. And the first thing I notice, he kind of gets to the rim at will. And he's always a guy who can get there using kind of finesse, using power, especially being able to utilize that size. And sometimes you see these taller guards not really realize that they have that size because maybe it was a recent growth spurt and you see them kind of settling for floaters or things in the paint, but you don't see them getting right to the rim. But he does sometimes miss on those opportunities, but that's a thing where that'll come with more practice, more times doing it.
Yeah, what's unique about Castle too, from what I see, what people really love is his ability to just change speeds at whatever. Because he's not really the most super explosive athlete by any means, but he does so good with his body control already for someone his size, and just using those finesse with changing speeds. That's what really helps him get around defenders. He doesn't really need to overpower anybody and force anything. He's patient. He takes his time, understands when to go and when to slow down. And that's a huge asset too. If you can understand already, I mean, a perfect example for someone who may not, and this is one of our guys, Omaha, that's someone who could learn to just, learn to be patient with themselves instead of just being high energy the whole time. Maybe you don't have to, especially, and he's good too, because that's someone for a power forward who doesn't really have a lot of strength. That's like the perfect thing to look into is just understanding like when you have to accelerate and decelerate and just how to use it around opposing defenders.
Yeah, and that's a trait that I love in a lot of prospects is being able to not allow the opposing team to kind of speed you up or slow you down. It's you control the pace of the game. You are the kind of highest IQ guy on the floor, and you're not going to let anybody change your game and how you play. Most notably, I think when you look at a lot of these point guards in the NBA draft this past year, Anthony Black was one of those guys where, I mean, he played at his pace and he didn't let anybody speed him up, slow him down. You saw the same thing with Cade Cunningham a couple years before in summer league. And that's a trait I look for when I look at guards, and I look at really any prospect is because if you have those intangibles there, especially when it comes to being able to manage a game, not just having the ball, but being off ball, controlling the pace of the game, that's really huge.
Yeah, and they'll be interesting too when you see him in the Big East because there's a lot of very good veteran guards coming in this year. So it'll be a lot interesting to see how he plays out against some of those guys with more experience and see if they can pressure him or not.
Yeah. And navigating through traffic is another thing. And I'm going to go back to his size again and being able to kind of control and power through contact is insanely valuable, especially when you're one of those taller point guards, because generally you're going to be matched up against guys who are 6'3", who maybe are 6'2" sometimes, maybe they're 6'4". When you have a whole 2 inches or 3 inches on them, I mean, being able to navigate is huge, and not drawing a charge, but having that finesse.
Right, and it'll be key too for UConn to get him on some of those mismatches because they do have a good amount of guards. I mean, they've got Tristan Newton and Cam Spencer around the 6'3", 6'4" range, so they'll probably end up guarding the ones and twos. So someone like a Stephon Castle will have to probably end up guarding more of the wings, but if you can get him switched off onto a smaller opponent, in the Big East play, then I don't see where he's going to have a problem trying to get around someone. I think he'll be able to use his size to his advantage and get to his spots where he normally does or create something for others. Oh, you're on mute.
Oh, okay. There we are. Let me click the button. I was gonna say I got a pop-up that said like, "Oh, your mic is disconnected." I was like, "Oh, okay."
Oh no.
Anyways, one thing I wanted to ask you before we move on to some of his weaknesses is what is the most important part of his game that you can see, especially as kind of like a talent evaluator?
Well, aside from the accelerating and decelerating, being able to control his own pace and tempo is his shot making ability. I mean, with someone his size too, he already has a good floater from the 5 to 8 feet range. There's just also too being able to use his size to help get tougher shots over smaller opponents or just any opponent. That's a huge plus already. If you can shoot contested shots, I mean, that's going to help you immensely, your draft
Yeah,
value.
I agree with that. Now, Caleb, moving on to those weaknesses. And like I said at the beginning and at the top of the video, there's going to be more to come, especially once we see him against harder competition, which we will. Uh, and the big thing with the first thing we're going to talk about is kind of bringing up that he's not the best athlete. And I just want you to kind of elaborate more on that and how he can kind of make up for that deficiency.
Well, we've seen for some good examples. So I know we have a few guys we talk about like Cade or Luca, and a good college example would be Franz Wagner from when he played at Michigan, his sophomore year when he had the big breakout year. That's to me a great example for seeing someone being able to make the game at their own pace, especially on a college level, because Franz isn't really the most athletic guy, but he can be surprisingly athletic at times. You just don't really see it. Maybe not so much from a moving standpoint, but from a vertical standpoint. So there'd be times where he would just kind of nonchalantly go to the basket, then all of a sudden he just throws one down over a guy who's 4 inches taller than him, and you just have no idea. But in college, if you just slow things down, because I know some people just like to play fast. Michigan State's a perfect example of that. There's someone who's always on the gas pedal, and then if you look at it too, with their turnovers in the past few years, it's been some of the worst turnover teams as a whole under Tom Izzo.
Hmm.
And a lot of that too is just from playing way too fast at times and just coughing up the ball and you don't have to. So I look at someone like Stephon Castle being someone who can not feel the pressure of having to just go, go, go. And plus, two, I don't think UConn really has the same firepower offensively that they had from last year. It's going to be a little bit more of a different team, a little bit younger on one side, but they also too have still some good shooter. I mean, Cam Spencer, I really liked him at Rutgers. I
Mhm.
think that's a huge pickup for them. And like I mentioned earlier, Newton's a smart player. He'll know how to be able to find guys. Caravan can step out, shoot threes, and Klingon's just going to be their offensive anchor down low. So I think for playing with those four guys, I can't imagine a more perfect fit like between those four guys than Stephon Castle.
Yeah, and earlier I talked about how maybe a lack of opportunity will lead to some of his demise, but like you just mentioned, it could always help him as well. Because if you have the players around you, I mean, you can elevate them, they're going to elevate you. It just makes you an overall better player. That's why usually when you get the number one pick in the NBA draft and you pick a guy, they're going to struggle right out of the gate
Hmm.
because you don't have anything around you. I mean, look at Kate mentioning the Pistons again. I'm trying to think of a non Pistons example of this. Let's think of like Anthony Davis. He was brought
Yeah.
into that Pelicans team, and although he was great and he was and he's a top 75 player right now all time, he didn't have any help and he struggled a little bit. Of course, he was a solid guy, but it took a couple years of building a little bit more around him to see that he could be a top 5 guy in the NBA. And of course, he didn't ultimately get to that due to a lot of injuries, but there was a point where people had him against Giannis.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great example. And Castle too, just from where he's gonna be, he'll be in the if we assume the draft was today, he'll be somewhere around like the later lottery range, like in the 8 to 12, I would say. But that's gonna be a team that I think already has their stuff figured out, and then they just need another piece or so. So it's not like you're gonna throw into the fire like I don't know, like you said, Anthony Davis going to a New Orleans team with nothing.
Yep.
It's not like you're gonna have him going to the Wizards where there's like no direction at all on that team, or the Hornets with like absolutely no envisionment for how they want to go in their future.
Yeah, and I'm looking at it right now. I'm looking at the 2023 draft, and I'm trying to see if I'm looking at that 8 to 12 range. You have Washington, but they're probably going to move down. So
Yeah, they're
I
going to
guess
move
kind of
down.
like making it up in my head, you're going to have probably Orlando around there. You're going to have Indiana around there, Utah, OKC, but they'll probably actually be later in the draft. You probably have a team like the Raptors, possibly Atlanta. So there's a lot of teams that I think he could fit really well with. And I also agree with that he kind of would struggle if he went to those
Hmm.
Washingtons or honestly, Washington's like the worst team. And then it goes, I don't really know what the next up is, like Charlotte, Detroit. But I feel like there's a huge gap between Washington and the field. Like, even
Yeah,
if the Spurs like rest Victor every other game and they get the second pick in the draft, I mean, he'd fit there. They don't have a lot of talent. It's like,
I, I think the only team that would compete with Washington is Charlotte. They don't figure their young players out, and guys don't take
mhm.
the steps they're supposed to take. That team is going to really struggle.
Yeah. And I don't want to be a homer with Detroit, so I almost put him in that category too.
I would too if they don't do good under Monty their first year.
Yeah. And I think we'll get into a Pistons debate some other time. We'll have a full episode where we can just talk all Pistons. Um, let's see here. So, Caleb, there's a certain roadblock that is very apparent when looking at Stephon Castle, and it has to do with his on ball defense. So, let's dig into that a little bit. What do you think?
Well, if you want to check out like some good stuff too for where we pull all this information from, Sports Illustrated has different breakdowns on guys,
Hmm.
which is very helpful because it just helps you put like videos into words. But yeah, with his on-ball defense, so in high school he ran a very zone-heavy defense, and typically when you put players in zones, it hides a lot of your weaknesses as an on-ball defender because you don't have to worry about it. You just have like an assigned area to cover. So that's going to be interesting to see because UConn's not really a team that runs a lot of zone, and when they do run zone, they get totally flamed by the other team. So who knows? They do have centers that aren't really like stretch centers, so they can just have them down there. They might run zone, but yeah, Stephon Castle is gonna have a lot of opportunity to show more of his on-ball defensive because UConn's not a team that really does a lot of, like I mentioned, doesn't do a lot of zone. So he's gonna have a lot of really good wings and guards on the defensive side that he's gonna have to guard in the Big East, and that's gonna really put him to the test to see where he's at as a defender, where's his potential, like can he grow into an elite defender one day despite not having the lack of burst and athleticism. But it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
Especially with that wingspan, it's something that you're really hoping for. Even if he doesn't guard some of those wings and he's guarding some of those best perimeter players in situations, I mean, if he has a 6'9" wingspan, that's enormous. That's bigger than a lot of the guys he's going to be guarding. So, like you said, he has his work cut out for him, but this is a season of kind of learning. So it might be rocky, but I think the big thing is looking for points where it comes across effectively.
Hmm.
So, do you have anything else you want to talk about in terms of Stephon Castle?
I think we got it all. Like I said, it'll be interesting to see how he plays out. I think because they're pretty depleted, at least at the small forward spot, they don't really have anybody except for like another 4-star coming in. So he'll pretty much get most of the reps, I think, at 3. And then depending on what they want to do with their backup guard situation, when they want to rest Spencer or Newton, I could see him just taking over some reps at 1 or 2.
Yeah. Moving on, Caleb. This is a guy that you've been talking about for a while. And in our last episode, we gave a little teaser at the end that we were going to be talking about Judah Mintz, and here we are 2 weeks later. Freshman season stats, he played for 32 games, 33 minutes a game, 16 points a game, 2 rebounds a game, about 5 assists per game, about 2 steals a game, 2.5 turnovers per game. Shot pretty well from the field, 44%. Didn't shoot too well from 3 at 30%, and shot 75 from the charity stripe. And for a guard, you definitely want to see a higher charity stripe percentage, but that's something you can live with, especially in his first year. I was reading an article earlier today that he's really focusing on his jump shot going into next year, which is kind of the only thing that's a glaring weakness to me. We'll talk about a few more of those. Uh, but, but Caleb, so Judah Mintz, can you talk about why you have this love affair for him?
Well, I just think he is one of the best. He was one of the best freshman guards in the country by far last year. I mean, someone who for Syracuse, he was second in points by just zero point 0.1 points behind Joe Girard, who was like their 4-year starter. So coming as a freshman, that's really impressive, especially for a Jim Boeheim coach team where normally the veteran guys take over a lot of the freshmen. But first in assists, first in steals as a freshman as well. That's really impressive too for seeing someone lead your team in those categories, especially when you're a starting point guard for the whole year. But yeah, he's just such a tough kid already. He loves to drive to the basket. It doesn't matter who's in his way. And also too, what I love about him is his mid-range game is so good and
Hmm.
he's so crafty. And this is another guy too where not like the most polarizing athlete, but he's just super sneaky. You don't know what he's gonna do, like how he's gonna create a shot, uses different spin moves, fakes, whatever he needs to do to get it done. And he's just got such a smooth mid-range game, whether contested or open. And I always love guards who take advantage of the mid-range because it seems like in today's NBA, all it is just three-pointer after three-pointer after three-pointer. So to see someone move inside the arc and get a little more of that old school mid-range basketball, I just love that just to see it in a point guard like him.
Yeah, and if anything, it opens the floor for everyone else because if you're
Hmm.
able to kind of crack the defense and get in for mid ranges, they're going to have to adjust. And then most of the time, that'll leave somebody a little bit more open on 3 point line if they're sending help, or it could lead to an open cut from somebody else. And like you said, the mid range is something very beautiful, and not a lot of people in the NBA are able to perfect that. And I feel like there'd be a lot more players who kind of reach all-star potential if they were able to use their mid-range
Yeah.
game. Um, but yeah, the NBA is weird in that way where it's kind of evolving, and that's where Carmelo Anthony kind of got blackballed by the NBA because of analytics and the death of the mid-range shot. But didn't they get a transfer to guard that's going to fit really well next to Judah Mintz?
Yes, so they brought in a guy from Notre Dame named JJ Starling. They thought he
Mhm.
was going to have possibly a Blake Wesley year, and that didn't really turn around. Notre Dame was a pretty lackluster team, but they brought him in too. So I was curious to see how they were going to fit, but I think they're going to fit just fine considering Mintz is that uh, true point guard. JJ Starling is more of a true shooting guard. So I don't really see them clashing for taking over who's going to take over for like the ball handling roles, but
Mhm.
just Mintz will be someone too where he's just gonna keep slashing through because he's so good around the rim. And we've seen too the 5 assist rate as a freshman. Yeah, 2.5 turnovers, but at least that ratio is positive. And plus, two,
Yep.
he's a freshman playing in the ACC, where say what you want, they weren't the strongest conference, but they still have really good talent, really good teams that they play.
Yeah.
So he'll probably clean the turnovers up this year, but I think having those two guys together, Starling might be a guy you cover in the future because he's been thrown around on some mock drafts as well. But I don't know. Yeah, Judah Mintz is literally just pretty much like any other guy we talk about, a 3 point jump shot away. And that's where he's got to get a little bit more consistent, not just overall as a shooter, but he just only took 2.1 attempts per game and made zero
Mm.
point 0.6 per game. So he's not even making one 3 pointer per game. And I think that's where he's really got to have to boost his value. You can make an argument that he's a late first rounder just based off his current skill set alone and just how good he is at the rim and just how good he is at controlling his body. But that's just probably the big seller point for me. Like, if you want to cement yourself in the first round conversation, you got to be more consistent from three.
Yeah, and this is a guy where, like you said, he's a jump shot away from being a top tier guy. And who knows? Judah Mintz could be the guy that jumps into the top 10 due to an amazing start to the year or a blow up at the end of the year. There's always a couple of those guys, and he has the potential. So, what else do you think it would take for him to kind of jump into top, well, let's say lottery consideration?
Aside from the 3 pointer, I think what would also help too is just being able to use the floor a lot better. When you see a lot of his highlights, this was something interesting that I saw and read is he favors the right side of the basket all the time.
Mm,
When you see his highlights, it's like, oh yeah, he just keeps attacking the right side. But just to be more comfortable using both sides of the floor, I think that's just a little bonus thing that can help him out. And then this is also another situation like Stephon Castle. If anybody knows Syracuse, they're famous for their zone that they play every year, and that's
mhm.
all they play. Well, now they have a new coach. That's their assistant coach in Red Autry. But who knows? Jim Boeheim still might have a hand in how they want things ran. They might still play zone defense. And we've already seen those 1.8 steals per game from being really good at guarding passing lanes. But for someone with Mintz's size, he's only 6'3", 175. So you want to see how he's going to be able to hold up against other point guards on man, especially like if he's on a mismatch. Like let's say he goes up against a Stephon Castle one day, like they just somehow meet in the tournament. I don't know if they play each other or not. I thought I saw something where UConn
Mm.
and Syracuse are playing the regular season, or they could play each other, but
That'd be
that
fun.
that, that could be like from 5 years ago when I was
Oh,
thinking about that. So who knows how that works out? But I would like to see him be able to play a little bit more on-ball defense, just to kind of see how he fits along playing against other guards. I mean, obviously, really great at guarding off-ball, but I want to see how someone like him, especially in the NBA, where zone doesn't exist in the NBA, the talent's way too good. They'll break it in like 2 seconds. So
yep. And you will sometimes see it thrown out there, and then, like you said, is broken in 0.2 seconds, and it's instant timeout. Okay, you have to guard, and that's what killed Rudy Gobert in Utah in the
yeah,
playoffs against the Clippers. Terrence Mann destroyed them because of the zone.
it's just not meant for the NBA.
Mm-hmm. And looking at Judah Mintz and Stephon Castle, I think are maybe not player breakdowns, more or less as kind of previews for what they're going to potentially showcase in their college setting. And Judah Mintz, you see him coming back for a second year. Stephon Castle, you'll see him coming in for a first year. So they're at very different parts in their basketball journey, but nonetheless, they're very talented prospects. I'm just going to throw a question at you real quick, Caleb. So, what are two things between these two players that are, let's say, similarities between them?
I would say not having the elite athleticism is one thing, maybe not from a vertical standpoint, but just from like an overall movement, just being able to control their bodies and being able to accelerate, decelerate, being able to use their craftiness and high IQ to create shots for their own, but for others. But also both of them as well, both have that similar trait of just making incredibly difficult shots.
Mhm.
Castle could be from anywhere. Judah Mintz, like I said, it's mostly from the mid range where he really does a lot of his work. And so, in a way, both of them offensively are pretty similar, just in different bodies. And they both pretty much have the same background for like defensiveness, where there's this unknown factor. You don't know what they look like on man defense for a full basketball game because they're just so zone protected.
Yeah. Those are good. That's a good comparison. Um, is there anything else, Caleb, that your heart desires to talk about with Judah Mintz?
Nope. All I can say is when I watched him in the ACC tournament last year and the emotion, just never give up, he played with, that's what really sold me on. I was saying this guy is going to be a future star. And then just to see his breakdown pretty much after the game when they lost, I know he took it really hard. It was really emotional. So I think he's going to play with a vengeance coming back this year, especially they have a new coach. They have all of their guys coming back from his recruiting class, which you never see that in today's college basketball, the
Yeah.
transfer portal. They have all six of those guys in that recruiting class coming back, as well as another guy who's a class ahead of him, Benny Williams, former top 40 recruits back. They bring in JJ Starling and three other really solid transfers. So Syracuse is a team that's going to really shock if I had to pick a sleeper team in the ACC, it's them.
Hmm. I feel like they're going to live or die by if they can shoot threes and at a consistent level.
That's pretty much been their entire basketball history is live and die by the three. But
Hmm.
what's also nice too is I don't know how they're gonna play offense under Autry this year, but one thing that really helped out with Boeheim is he runs a lot of ISO offense. Obviously, look at Carmelo Anthony, why he succeeded so much.
Hmm.
But in the NBA, where ISO is just so heavy, I mean that's perfect for Judah Mintz, because he can just
Yeah.
initiate his own. If he has to dish it off, he can. So I think playing that offensive system really benefited him, and I think that's probably too why he doesn't really shoot as many 3-pointers with being the lead attacker on offense, because they had guys like Joe Girard, who would be around him who could shoot. Whether he makes them or not, who knows? But they have guys around him who can shoot threes. JJ Starling will be one of those guys this year. Justin Taylor, returning sophomore guy, can be a nice 3-point shooter as well for him. So, yeah, he'll be definitely an interesting player to watch out for.
So next week, Caleb, who do you want to talk about? I think Xavier Booker might be a good one. Michigan State guy.
Oh, I like me some Xavier Booker.
Is there anybody else that you can think of that'd be a good maybe contrast from Xavier Booker, or someone who might be in the same boat that's returning? Maybe a foreign dude.
Why don't we do a Dembona? Because I feel like he doesn't have the jump shot, but we talk about him so much. And I think when we talked about him earlier with UCLA, teasing him being a key factor this year, I think that would be someone too to really watch out for.
Cool. So Xavier Booker and a Dembona. Does that sound good to you, Caleb?
Good. Let's get into the big guys.
Cool. So thank you for joining us on today's episode of Peak and Roll, and we will not have another 2-week hiatus. And well, if we do, oh well. But hope you all enjoy the rest of your, what day is it today, Caleb? It's a Monday. Rest of your Monday, I guess for you would be Tuesday at this time. Either way, hope you all have a great time. Peace out.